Welcome to With You Podcast,
where we explore relationships and life transitions.
I still am David.
And I'm still Tara.
And we are here talking with you.
We're still here. In our home studio.
Yeah, it's really nice. I think this is 2 in a row.
I know. We won't be for the next 3 weeks.
No, we'll be coming from all over for you. So,
yeah.
But we are here this week, and we want to talk about something that we did last month. We gave a little...
We were thinking through, because we have said that this season is kind of focused on the ideas of pain and play. And the last 2 episodes have been kind of focusing on the idea of how both of those can be purposeful in our lives and lead to growth. And so we're going to explore those in different directions.
That's right.
And so we were talking through a talk that we gave this summer. We got to speak at family camp in Michigan.
It was a lot of fun. It was our kind of time to do things together and try out what we're shooting for. It's not just a podcast, but teaching and speaking together.
Yeah. So the theme of that weekend was
legendary journeys.
Legendary journeys. So we came up with we spoke at 4 different chapels, and we talked about elements that help you on a journey. Yeah. And we were talking about that after that and thinking about how that's really applicable to going through a journey of pain, a painful journey, or really anything that we go through in life. So we thought we'll share those principles, since we already kind of worked on our thoughts around that.
Yeah, and they really fit well with kind of our 4 pillars. And so we're going to share it with you, see what you think about it. And we'll start with, so the fun part, I love your literary
I know.
focus.
I was a literature minor, and a journalist, and yet I still love the cheesy things like alliteration. I can't help it.
It's really helpful.
Just like a pastor, and there are 3 points and their alliterations. And
I know. And so we have a bonus point. We have 4 points, and they're all C words. And so we're gonna start with calling, and that's a loaded word, especially within kind of faith community. Calling,
like what you feel called to, or what is your calling, and it's spoken about a lot, especially in faith communities, or going on a mission or things like that. Like, I feel called to this, that it, like, the pull is from something bigger than myself.
Yeah, so God's call on your life, or God's purpose for your life. And it feels big. When you talk about it that way, it feels huge.
Yeah.
And we want to make it a little bit smaller. I mean, there's still a purpose, but maybe thinking about it that way. I at lunch today, we talked about it, and I think of it in a tuning fork kind of way, how the tuning fork vibrates, and then I'm vibrating at the same frequency of the tuning fork. That's kind of what I feel in terms of when I know I'm in my lane, or I know I'm living out kind of how I'm twisted to be, is that it fits with who I am.
Right. So we're talking about calling in relation to, if we're going, especially in relation to something painful, in relation to pain. And that's weird to think about a calling in relation to pain. But the idea we want to explore is finding some sort of purpose in that. And it does not mean that when somebody's hurting, you say, God works all things together for good, or what is the purpose for this? That can actually be more painful.
Yeah.
But it's inside yourself finding, like, well, I can't escape this. Right. Maybe it's chronic pain, or maybe it's an ongoing relationship that's painful,
or loss
that doesn't change or go away. So, not saying that God is calling you to that, but we're saying there's some sense of knowing this is just my lot.
Yeah.
Like, of understanding this is where I am.
Yep.
This is who I need to be right now. And so how do I figure out meaning around this in dealing with it?
How do I live on this path? It's kind of like, here's the path I'm on.
Right. That's a good way to say it. Like, your calling is, here's the path. Like, you're already on the path.
Right.
And it's not like you're listening to a calling from somewhere else and saying, I should be on this. It's just like, here I am.
Yeah.
Now, how do I deal with it?
And we all get to that path in different ways. Some, it's like I'm choosing that path.
Mm-hmm.
Others, it's like this path has been chosen for me.
Yeah.
But we're on a path, and do
Yeah.
we realize that? And we talk about that. Like, we grew up in an age where, I think we talked about this in old technology, of like maps, like real physical maps.
Yeah.
And our path to going to California to Indiana.
Yeah.
And we talked about the map part of it. We
Right.
didn't speak about the beforehand of how did we know we were going to go to Indiana.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it was grad school. I was finishing up. You were 3 months pregnant. You had a job in California, but we couldn't live on that. And we had to figure out what's our path.
Yeah.
And the Christian way of saying that is, what's God's call on our life for the next season?
Yeah.
That's a loaded way of saying, just like, where's our path?
Yeah.
And we found a good way of navigating a path together.
Right.
And it was through reflection.
Yeah. I mean, we talked about it, but then we knew we might not be on the same page about what that was. So we took time apart to think and pray about it, and then come without talking about it for a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
So we weren't just perseverating or arguing or whatever, and then coming back and saying what, exploring how each other feels about it, and what we feel might be the right path.
Yeah.
Together.
Yeah.
Taking both person's interests into account, not just our own.
And we kind of agreed beforehand of, if we're in agreement, we know that's the path. If not, then we kind of have to rethink it, because we're in this together. And so that was a work path, a way we did it. But you can think about that in terms of grief, or in terms, I see that a lot in grief, in painful situations in couples.
What's that?
That the path is to go through it, but how they do that is really different, and can be really challenging, and going, oh, we're going through this, but we're going to go through it in different ways, but we're going through it. The path is, we're going through this together. We may hurt each other in the process, not intentionally, but I'm grieving at a different time in a different way than you are.
Yeah.
And it doesn't feel like the same path.
Right. Yeah, and that's one thing we talked about in this, when we talked about this at Bear Lake, was how we hear a calling. Like, how do you know when there's a lot of different paths that you could take? And I think a lot of people get frozen there.
Yeah.
Like, you see a lot of possibilities, or you see different ways you could get out of this, or escape it, or manage it a different way. And it's really hard to know what's the right way.
And I think the younger generation is having that challenge right now. There's so many choices in front of you. How do you know which choice to make? And it can be,
and it feels like if you choose one, then the next one will be wrong.
Yeah.
And the first thing we say is just taking some action.
Yeah.
You just got to take some action.
Take a step.
And it doesn't matter if it's the wrong thing, because it's not. If you're moving forward, that's your learning, whether that path works or not.
Yeah.
So taking some sort of action in the direction of one path, but also hearing from people that you trust. So we talked about this in relation to literally hearing God's calling, because that's part of our faith, is that we're called to love and serve God. And so hearing his invitation is an important thing, and how he's gifted us to serve.
Yeah.
But in relation to lots of other things, it can be hearing what is that path that's going to work for me. And it could be a career thing. It could be working through a relationship, but listening to people who are farther ahead of you on that path is always a good way to start.
Yeah. And people that know you really well.
Yes. Not just random people.
Yeah. The person at the grocery store,
Yeah.
The cashier.
They might have an opinion that just doesn't work for you.
Especially at the grocery store, where they ask you lots of questions of like, oh, it seems like you're going to have a party because you have 27
That was always
chocolates.
in Georgia. They always wanted to talk for a long time.
And they thought they knew what was a good path for our lives.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of random people you meet do have opinions on that. And so that's not what we're talking about with listening to people. It's listening to people who have some experience that you respect and trust.
Yeah.
And also people who know something about you and what might be a good fit for you. And taking that into consideration, and valuing other people's input on those things.
And it's helpful for us. It's been helpful because our process is similar. There's a sense of we know ourselves real well, and we have people that can speak into our lives, but then it's kind of like, oh, this is a good fit. There's a sense of knowing and discernment
Yeah.
that this is a good fit. That's not for everybody, but that's one way. And it helps that we share that for
Yeah.
our,
I mean, it helps a lot when we've got the same process.
yeah.
So a lot of people might not be in that same position working through it with somebody else, but
And then you have to talk through your process and make it overt.
right. Talk about how you got there and right.
Yeah, so that was the first one. That was calling, and I think it matches up for us with perspective of having a sense of this is where I'm going, this is where I should be going,
And this is where I've been.
This is where I've been. It then helps the step in the moment be a little less anxiety making.
Right. And it's seeing that next step isn't going to determine the rest of your life.
You can always...
I think that's what gets is hard. Is like, I'm doing this wrong, so I'll just stop. Or, I don't want to go in that direction because that'll exclude all these things. And there's some situations where that might close some doors, but in general, it's better to move forward and find out something about yourself. And that is a direction.
Yeah. I see that with young clinicians. They're worried that they have to do the right thing in session. And sometimes they do way too much. And it's like, you know what? We'll see them next week. And we can, if we make a mistake.
If I was a clinician, that would probably be me.
You go, if you make a mistake, we can have the conversation going, you know what? Let's talk about that and try something different. My favorite saying is, I never take a position I can't retreat from. I think that's helpful here, that we can have a sense of where we should be going, and also realizing rarely are we locked in such a way that we can
change course. That just made me think, what you said about that made me think of how I coach people through writing birth plans, because that's preparing for a challenge that we know is going to be painful. It's going to be, it's going to require
painful
occasionally. It's going to require a lot of you. It's going to require you to dig deep. And yet there's so many unknowns about it. And so there's kind of controversy about birth plans, because it sounds like a checklist of it's only going to be satisfying or a good outcome if all of these things get checked off. And in my mind, that's not what a birth plan's about at all. It's about knowing all of your options and just getting informed about what this challenge might be. And then having an idea of how you're going to navigate those things and what some of the options might be along the way before you're in a stressful situation and making decisions. And it's not a failure if the course changes. To me, it's just like a reroute. I tell people when they say, but I don't want to make a birth plan because then I'm going to be disappointed if it doesn't go that way.
Hello, Mrs. Van Dyke. We're going to recalculate. Recalculating.
And it is that way. I tell them it's just like if you chart your course on a map to go. When we talked about when we got lost going, I'm not lost, but rerouted to a different state.
took a turn that wasn't the best fit.
And it wasn't the way we planned to go, but we still got to our destination. And so I think that's part of the idea of getting started, of just like, it's okay if the route changes. So it's better to get started and be okay with kind of being flexible within your structured idea.
And we talked about this on our walk this morning of it's easier if you have more energy and are more activated, even if it's too much and you have to dial it back, there's energy there to do something. If you're passive or feeling overwhelmed and just can't make a move, depressed, low energy, it's a lot harder to generate that. So it's
inertia. So just getting the ball, that's physics too. We can talk physics. Woo! An object that is in motion stays in motion. Right? So that's a good thought too.
That's your father right there.
So take a step.
Yeah, everything was physics with him.
It was. He always got back to physics.
All right, well, let's move on to the second one.
So the second C is commitment.
Commitment.
So once you're on that path, you got to commit.
You have to. I think about watching you skydive, and I saw some people where they got frozen up in the plane. And it's like they got on the plane, they drove to the airport, and then they're stuck, and you can see the person that's on their back trying to gently encourage them out of the plane.
Yes, because this is tandem skydiving where you're tied to somebody who knows how to do it better than you do.
To make
But,
sure.
in that illustration, though, too, that shows that it's not wrong that they changed their mind.
Yeah,
They
true.
had an
Took a step.
intention of doing this thing. They committed to it and then found when they got closer that it wasn't the right path.
Yeah.
And that's okay,
Yeah.
too. That doesn't mean it's a failure. It means they made the decision that was right for them. They completely changed course. They came down on a plane instead of under a parachute.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay, too. So by commitment, we also don't mean, you're locked in for life.
Right.
That's what freezes people. In the case of what we were talking about at Bear Lake, this was about commitment to our faith. And in that case, I think that's different.
Yeah.
I think if you really believe enough in something that you start on that course, commitment is the next step.
Yeah.
And that's, like marriage.
Yep.
We believe we made that choice. We're committed. There
Until
are instances,
one of us dies.
Well, and there are instances in some marriages where there's other reasons why it's healthier to end. But the idea is that we're committed to walking this path.
And that
together.
We're staying true to our commitment.
Right.
I think I have a story from when I was little. I think it was 5. And it's a family story. Dad, I wanted to play mini mite football, it was called.
Mini mite.
Mini mite. That was, I don't know, around here it's Pop Warner. It was mini mite in Western Michigan, and wanted to play football. And I begged and begged and begged. And, shoulder pads were like this, helmet I could barely see out of. And Mom and Dad talked about it. Dad put me in the car, said, okay, listen here, son. If we invest in this, and I'm 5, you have to keep going and finish out the season. It doesn't mean you have to play forever, but you're making a commitment to this season. Got there first time, someone hit me and I was done. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I remember the car ride home.
Had tackle and mini mite football?
Oh yeah, no, it was full contact. And
No.
Most of my football career I spent laying face down in the grass. So, but I got in the car and the first thing I said to my dad was, I don't want to do this. And he's like, David, what did we say? What was the conversation? It was a commitment conversation.
Yeah.
And for him, it wasn't, I had to play football, but it was modeling this idea. When you make a choice that has some investment, there was financial investment in the family and time and
for the team.
Yeah. That you follow through. And it didn't mean I had to be a football player for a lifetime, but he up front said, this is what you're committing to.
Mm-hmm.
And oh man, it was hard, but it did. I appreciated it because it taught me about my dad, and it taught me about that idea of even when things get hard, back to our pain idea.
Right.
Sometimes painful things we want to run from, we want to hide from, and avoid, and sometimes the best way through in birth, you can't avoid that. Baby has to come out.
There's no way out. Yeah.
And so I have to be all in. I have to lean in, and the pain is different then.
Right. Because when we fight it or try to escape it, it definitely heightens the pain.
Yeah.
And that's not for every painful experience.
Yeah.
But it's worth asking, if we're talking about commitment, what are we committed to?
Yeah.
Like, are you committed to seeing this through? Are we committed to being true to ourselves, to listening to our right path or to God or whatever? In the story that we used in this talk about commitment was the biblical story of Ruth and Naomi.
Right. Yeah.
And in that story, it's, Ruth is committed to her mother-in-law, and it's unusual. Like, she didn't need to. She had every out, and it was a hard decision to leave her own land and go somewhere unknown. And she had just decided, I am committed to you wherever you go. Like she said, where you go, I will go. And sometimes it needs to be that. It needs to be, I know this is going to be hard, but I made this commitment and this is what I'm doing.
Yeah. And knowing the rest of the story, it turned out remarkable.
Yeah. She was rewarded for that.
But yeah, even Naomi, her mother-in-law, was like, yeah, I have nothing for you.
Yeah,
you are released.
She told her several times, please just go.
But I think that's how these go together, right?
Yeah.
Of like Ruth had an understanding of what she committed to, her calling, and lived into that. And it kind of ekes into the next one. How did you learn about commitment? I know we didn't talk about this, if you had a story on this one or not.
I don't know. Did I have a personal story that we talked about in the We should have looked back at our notes.
Yeah, we should have looked at our notes.
I don't know. Let's just skip that.
I think it was to me.
Must have been. Yeah, 32 years later, and I'm still here.
I know, and everybody's like, "That is a remarkable commitment on your part." So, luckily, we like to laugh a little bit.
Yeah.
So the third one is, I think, when I think about this, when I think about you, courage.
You think of me?
Yeah, you have a lot of courage.
You don't think of the cowardly lion?
Well, I said it like the coward.
I know.
Courage. But yeah, and he didn't have that. He wanted to have that, the cowardly lion from The Wizard of Oz, but it felt like he should, and he had a hard time finding it until he had opportunities in difficult things, that the gift he got of courage at the end was what he had learned along the way.
Yeah. So
hey, we should have talked about that before. That's a really good.
Yeah. But if you follow this path, so just thinking about, if you're about to go through something hard, or you are going through something hard, the calling is what path are you on? What path are you on? How do you commit to managing this well?
Yeah.
Like going through whatever this is and keeping your sense of self intact, your faith intact, your healthy relationships, all of that, your own personal health, physical health.
Yep.
And then what does it take to keep going? Because you make the decision to do something, sometimes that's the easy part.
Yeah.
Saying yes, okay, I've decided I will accept that this is the thing I have to do. It's going to be hard. But then when it keeps on going, some pain is chronic. Some relationships are a lifetime of stress. Sometimes there's not an easy ending or resolution. So how do you keep going? And that's where we thought of courage in there, of just courage. The thing we know about courage is that it doesn't mean we're not afraid.
Yeah. And that we can be afraid, but then how do you respond? We're always about responding, and courage is the response.
It is the response.
And the just a couple of stories. I mean, we did a lot of Lord of the Rings clips for these.
We did, yeah, because we know our audience.
Yeah, and it was a legendary journey.
Yeah.
And so, and I think about that in terms of courage. The little hobbits, they have no superpowers in the Lord of the Rings, and yet they demonstrate courage. There's all these scary things that are going on, and they keep going, and their commitment to keeping going and their willingness to lean into that encourages those around them.
Yeah. And that's the story we kind of use throughout too, of just a picture of Frodo getting that calling to carry the ring to Mordor, and then being committed. I'm committed to this. I'm going to do it. I'm going to see it all the way through. And then so many times having to have courage to keep going. Courage, I think, has to come up at those moments where you get really tired of whatever it is you're called to do, whatever path it is you're on that's hard, and you've done it enough. You're just tired. It's enough. Yeah. And that's where we have to summon courage. And I think sometimes it's kind of a choice of saying, I'm gonna just keep going. Yeah. And I think the decision to just keep going is courage.
And it's a following it. You can be courageous at the beginning, and then things go badly.
Yeah.
And how do you respond? So the story we used was Peter. And it was right after the feeding of the 5,000. Jesus sent the disciples out in the boat, and they're fishermen, so they're comfortable in a boat. And they were taking this long boat ride through the night, and things got tough. The hurricane that just ran through Florida.
Right.
And they were freaking out, and Jesus is walking on the water. Peter gets excited, jumps out, walks to him. But then all of a sudden he realizes, hey, this is against physics.
Yeah.
He had a physics moment. He looks
down, it's oh.
Yeah. But then his courage to reach out, even in his fear, was kind of that. So as we think of Lord of the Rings, as we think about childbirth, I'm sure you've heard women go, I don't think I can do this.
I mean, frequently.
And maybe more colorfully.
Yeah.
And louder.
In all kinds of ways.
Yeah.
I'm sure I said that during our births of our kids. Lots of times people say, I don't want to do this anymore. We might be in the hospital, full blown labor, and they say, honey, pack our bags. I'm going home. I'm done. And you can't, I mean, you can't, but it's that feeling of like, I don't know if I can see this to completion.
Yeah. The
This
fear,
is
the
bigger
pain.
than I thought it was. And I don't know how I'm going to get through this. And I think there's lots of situations in our lives that feel like that.
And I love the stories you tell about that, because a lot of it is then where do their eyes go to, right? Getting a focal point or focusing on their partner, or you saying, hey, look, and your calm presence and voice takes them out of that fear moment into kind of shared courage almost, or vicarious courage. That it's like, let's focus on this and let's just worry about this moment, this breath.
That's exactly what we do.
Wow.
And that's exactly what gets people through, because they'll also always ask at some point when things get really hard, just tell me how much longer. Just tell me how many more contractions. Like, I just need to know
I have a
how
meeting.
long I have to do this. And I can sort of plan it out. And nobody can tell you that in any situation, really.
Yeah.
And so what I do to prepare them, and while we're in that moment, is saying, we don't have to worry about later. We just do the next thing. We just do the next one.
Yeah.
Just the next one. We don't think about any ones beyond that. Just this one. And exactly what you said, getting them to focus in, especially if they have a good connection going with their partner. I love to get them looking at their partner, and that oxytocin flows, and that refocusing and feeling the energy come between them, and the touch and all of that. But if, that's sometimes they need somebody who's not that close emotionally to them. And then I can be the focal point, and I can get closer to their face and model the breath, and that will do it often. Just get them out of that, what we call the fear, tension, pain cycle. And actually that's probably really relevant in this, what we're talking about too, is, we, when we get afraid of something, we gather tension in our body. Usually we start to get coiled and sort of ready for fight or flight. And when we have tension in our body, if we're talking about physical pain, then we feel the pain more intensely. And then when we feel the pain more intensely, we're really afraid of the next pain. And then when that fear builds, the tension builds.
Yeah.
And then we get stuck in this cycle. And when we get stuck in that cycle, it's really hard for anyone to help you.
Yeah.
I have had clients that get stuck there, and we're trying our best to reach them and do all of the things to reach them and help them refocus, and they can't get out of it.
Yeah.
So the best thing is not to let yourself get there. So it's finding ways to not get in that fear-based response.
Or disrupting the cycle.
Yeah.
If you find yourself starting at the beginning of it.
Recognize it when it starts to build, and have some tools like the breathing techniques, the box breathing, and things that we've taught before for therapists teach, childbirth educators teach, for managing that body response.
And I think
pain.
that's the thing in terms of courage. We think of like, assertiveness or aggressiveness,
warrior mentality.
Yeah, going after it. But courage starts with being in your body. I mean, as you're talking about that, I was like, do I notice even now, like how my shoulders are? Do I notice my body? We really don't. We are a lot of times disconnected from our body, especially in painful times.
Yeah.
And like what you were saying of getting into your body, whether it's trauma or childbirth or even relationships of like, if I take a minute when we're having a discussion or a disagreement and kind of realize what's happening in my body, it gives me more opportunities to respond, which I think is part of courage.
Well, and we
There's
respond
more options.
differently too, right? Like if you're saying something that we're disagreeing intensely about, and it's escalating, my body's probably starting to already, get tight around the shoulders. Your body kind of coils for a response, and then that response that comes out is going to be
exciting.
So noticing that is part of the courage of response of like, I'm going to see this through. How do I do it in a healthy way? How do I do it that's honoring my body responds, not storing extra pain in my body, and is fair to the person I'm dealing with.
And a lot of that is slowing down. So what are we focusing on? Kind of the eyes. Where do our eyes go to? Peter, is his eyes on Jesus or on the waves? The woman in childbirth, are my eyes inward? Are my eyes outward? And then noticing what's happening in my body and then slowing down.
Slowing down or taking a break. Because I thought about that when you said, courage is watching your body, knowing what's happening, and we're talking about continuing. Courage is continuing, making the decision to keep going when something's hard. But sometimes, the decision, I guess, between what's just too much work or what's just normally painful or what's burnout or some actual alarm system in your body that this needs to stop.
Yeah, danger.
Yeah. And, in the case of burnout or, a really escalated argument, there's really a need to take a break.
Yeah.
So the slowing down in the middle of the thing, and then maybe sometimes like just disconnecting and reconnecting.
Well, in our time in Africa, we talked about burnout, and part of it was, at least in our faith component, there is a break built in, a Sabbath, a day off from the 6 days of work, and that it's courageous because there's so much to do. Those pastors we were talking to had work and that they were employed for, then pastoring and taking care of their family and everybody else. They had no time. And it was just on to the next thing, which can look courageous. But I think the courageous thing is to slow down and take a break, which is a design for our bodies.
It's a little countercultural, but it was given to us as a gift.
Yeah, which it doesn't feel like it, especially if you're type A, let's go. But those breaks allow us to slow, to breathe, to be in our bodies, to kind of, what am I looking at? And to take a pause. I make my best decisions when I slow down. Like if we were in an argument, I would go faster and faster, and I would think fast, speak fast, and probably make huge mistakes fast in terms of what I would say.
Yeah.
And having to slow down. But in the heat of the moment.
Which is partly why we made those big decisions by spending time apart, thinking about it and coming back together so that we'd have time. And taking a rest also allows our brains to recharge and think more creatively.
Yep.
And then maybe problem solve in a different way.
Yeah. Well, like you had a forced rest of in waiting for the baby or grandbaby to come, and you had a really productive time.
Yeah.
Where it was slowed down, there was quiet, there was for you structure, like orderliness that allowed you to think differently. Yeah. And I don't think people realize our environment, everything coming at us affects how we think.
Yeah.
And create.
Big time. So even just taking a walk in nature, a lot of people live with more nature around them. We live in a place where we have to seek it. We have to, and that's why we take walks to places that, feel like we can hear birds and see trees.
A drainage ditch, that's our pond that we get to enjoy.
It's a bit nicer than that. But it does give us literal and sort of internal space, doesn't it? Like we have more productive talks.
Oh yeah.
We're walking around a lake and we can think, I don't know, just with more clarity.
It feels like we have more oxygen. Like,
we literally probably do.
By the trees. And like the air feels differently, but you start to notice things different versus your same patterns. I joke with my students of you need to sit in a different place in class frequently so that you experience the class different. If you're sitting in the same position, you're only experiencing the sound, the sights from that one location. And if you get a different location, you're going to have a slightly different experience.
Sorry that I'm giggling at that. It just
I know. I'm like, okay, now we're gonna have a fight.
Fight.
I don't know.
No, it just
I'm getting agitated.
I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing.
Yeah, not with me.
Because of you. Because when I think early on in our relationship, I tend to drive us around more now.
Yeah,
but I think we were
that.
a lot more like traditional. I never saw either of our mothers driving around. So you used to drive everywhere, but it would always, I'm just such a creature of habit. If I'm going to go from here to, school or work, I'm going to take the same route usually. At least I've changed in that. I'm more I'm more adventurous in that sense.
I love that
but
about you.
You would drive. I mean, we'd be
I
going
would
the
drive
same
you
place.
crazy.
I would be like, "Where are you going? I've never seen this place." And you say, "I don't know where I am. I'm just like to change it up."
Yeah, just take a different route.
You would go a different route every single time, and I'd ask, "Why is there less traffic?" I don't know. I just want to see something different.
Yeah, I think this would be an interesting way to go, and who knows what would happen.
Who knows?
And sometimes we got there late. But it was
a new concept for me.
It was a different experience, and but it also goes to, you have to trust each other. Right. And that's courageous too. Like, oh, you have a way of doing it. I have a different way of doing it. Can we trust each other? Are we courageous enough to take the risk to be influenced by the other?
Yeah.
Which leans into our fourth category.
It does. Our favorite one, because it's what we're all about.
It's the name of the podcast.
So our recap is our calling. What path are we on? Our commitment. How do we commit to going through it in a healthy way? Courage. What do we do to keep going when it gets even harder? And the final thing is companions.
Oh, do it together.
The best thing on a hard journey is a companion.
Yeah, this is in the Lord of the Rings one. This is where I cry every time of Samwise Gamgee. If you're not a Lord of the Rings or Tolkien person, sorry. Pause right here, read the trilogy, and then come back.
It'll take a while.
We'll see you in 2026. But Samwise can't carry the ring. So there's this ring that Frodo has to carry, and he's a hobbit, and his buddy is Sam, and he goes with him all the time. And the ring is becoming a burden. And so we could think about pain. We could think about loss, just whatever burdens in your life. And people can't carry it for you, but they can travel with you, and they can carry you. And
are you going to cry?
I think I am. Turn off the camera. Don't look at me. But he's like, Mr. Frodo, I can't carry this, but I can carry you. And he picks him up.
Gotcha.
Man. And he carries him because he can't take it on his own.
Yeah.
His strength is failing. And his friend, his companion, the person walking with him is with him.
Yeah.
And it's what we feel deeply about on this.
Yeah. Whew. I mean, that is the core. All those other things are important, but that's the core. That's the core of the whole reason God sent Jesus to earth. It's the whole reason he gave us each other.
Yeah. Why we have community in terms of church.
And we're not supposed to do it alone.
No.
So there's something, we're built for that connection. And there's something, if you listen to any story that moves people, it's always about somebody stepping in and helping somebody when it's hard, or somebody overcoming that, but with support from people who help carry that hard thing. Yeah.
And I want to highlight, it's not extroversion versus introversion, because I think sometimes people say, I'm an introvert, I don't need people. I don't get energized by spending a lot of time with people, but you still need
and it's
people.
having a smaller group of close friends, I think, because I am an introvert. I'd say I'm a socially I'm a social introvert.
This feels like a support group. So you say, hi, I'm Tara. I'm an introvert. Hi, Tara.
Hi, Tara. How can we help you?
No, you wouldn't be in a group.
No, that's right. I'd be
You'd all be on Zoom
popcorn
or something.
Yeah.
Sorry, I distracted you from the point. But you still need a small group of people.
Yeah. And there's a lot of people that I hear talk about their faith in that way, that they say, my faith is private. I don't need a church. My faith is private between me and God. And if it's, that's really not how God created it to be.
No.
The whole idea is that we are to do it together. We learn from each other. Yeah, people are hard to be with sometimes.
Yeah, that's why we need courage.
Part of and the commitment. Yeah. But they're also necessary. Yeah. And sometimes getting through the hard parts of the relationship, get to a deeper part that's even more satisfying.
Yeah. It makes me think of just the last 5 years with COVID. The hard part of COVID has been isolation.
Yeah.
It wasn't, yes, there were threats physically, but I think a deep killer of our souls and our relational skills and child development was the isolation, because it's counter to this. It's the opposite of companionship and being with. It's I'm by myself, and there's a comfort to it because I don't have to navigate the difficult things, but the isolation is like poison. In our bodies. And thinking back to our bodies, that there's something about relationships that help live long. I know I'm living longer because I'm in relationship with you. One, you help me not do stupid things, and two, you make sure I go to the doctor. So those things are times when you carry me because of either phone anxiety or whatever it is that prevents things from happening.
Well, unlike in our last episode, just the idea of play, someone to play with is important.
Yeah, it really is.
Laughter really reduces our stress and makes our lives longer.
Yeah, I can think of all the kind of really important points in my life, the pain points, the major pain points. All of them had a few people that were with me that I would say helped carry me through. And for us, that's what we want for all of you. That's what we want for each other, is both for you and I, but also I don't want you to be the sole person to carry me. I'm a heavy load, man. And so I think sometimes we think, oh, my partner, my wife or husband, that's all I need.
Yeah,
and
that's a good point.
That's problematic. I mean, yes, I would say yes to that. And yes, you need your spouse to be there.
We need each other, but it's also unhealthy if I look to you to meet all of my relational needs.
Yeah.
That's a heavy burden to bear too.
I don't think I can breathe now.
Our relationship is a lot better when we have times with relationships outside and spend time together.
Yeah, and we bring that in. I mean, that conversations that I have with the guys I meet with weekly, it gives us something to talk about and build our connection around.
Well, I know a lot of people feel really lonely and feel like it's hard to find that. But I think that's another one of those things that takes an action step forward, because I do know a lot of people who kind of hope it'll just happen organically. So they kind of wait for someone to just come into their life. It doesn't usually happen that way.
No. You know how I do it?
You chase people down.
Yeah. I'm like, you're going to be my friend. You don't know it now, and I've done that probably 3 or 4 times in my life. Yeah. I'm just like, nope, that person.
I remember some people that you spoke that out loud to them. You told them you had chosen them.
Yeah.
A couple that we're friends with who've moved away.
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about?
Yeah.
And he was really freaked out by it. But they stayed our friends.
They did stay our friends, but it was
I think we had to work a little harder after that, because he was like, wait, I've never heard that before. What do you mean?
I know. It kind of had stalker. He responded like, but it's intimacy. It's just like, if I'm going to commit, I only have certain amount of time and space in my life. And so I am choosing, with you. Back to this commitment, I'm choosing, and it wasn't forced. Like, they had a choice.
They did have a choice.
But they
always have a choice.
It was where I was investing in.
Yeah.
And I would have to live with the sadness and the pain if they're like, no. Which there's been those times.
I mean,
that was my high school dating life. Hey, I choose you. Nope.
Well, I don't choose you.
Okay. And then you go and have a whole gallon of ice cream. And being lactose intolerant, that's really self-harm.
Yeah.
Well, where do we land this thing?
I mean, I think we threw a lot of stuff out there, and I hope
these were four chapel talks.
I mean, each of these was an hour, I think. So,
maybe we can land this one with the story we talked about, because I love that it was Mary and Elizabeth, and it's all about pregnancy. It's a teen pregnant.
You want me to talk through that whole story?
Yeah, just a little bit. I think the teen pregnancy and the geriatric pregnancy. I was thinking you were going to say
the courage story that I talked about with swimming in the lake
hippos,
full of hippos.
Yeah, no, that makes me uncomfortable.
Where I trusted my dad, so I jumped into a lake full of crocodiles and hippos and swam to him. And I'm still alive.
You couldn't see, but you kept on popping your head up to see your dad.
To keep my eyes on my dad, and I knew I'd be okay.
Yeah, and I think that's a beautiful spiritual metaphor.
Yeah, if I told that story for real, I'd be the one crying.
Yeah, so let's just talk about teen pregnancy.
Okay,
as
so
the
it is
ending.
one of my favorite stories in the Bible. So since you brought it up, we'll end with that story
Yeah, that sounds good.
because I think it's an amazing story. Um, so I mean, it could take a long time to
Yeah,
tell the whole
we got
story.
nothing but time. Zachary will edit this out if it's bad.
Okay,
Yeah.
so the story where the angel comes to Mary, a teenage single
Yeah, like
girl,
14
and
ish.
tells her she's going to be the mother of God,
Yeah.
basically. Not basically,
Well,
does
actually,
actually. And that she's going to become pregnant and have a son. And this is going to be social shame because she and her intended are not married. And so this is an amazing proposition, but it's also going to be really hard.
hmm
And a little earlier, an angel had gone to the husband of her cousin Elizabeth, had gone to Zechariah and said that they, in their old age, Elizabeth was beyond the age of having a child. So there's teenage Mary, and there's what we call in obstetrics a geriatric pregnancy. I hate the 35 and above, which is terrible,
but
but
I think Elizabeth was
she was
older
older
than
than that.
35.
So
Yeah.
she had not had children, and that in those days in that culture that was also
Social
shameful.
shame. Yeah.
But the angel tells her husband Zechariah that they're going to have a child, and that he's going to be special and set apart. And so there's already some parallel things going on. But then when the angel speaks to Mary and tells her this huge announcement, like the most earth-shattering announcement, he also gives her this extra information. Your cousin Elizabeth is also with child, and
Yeah.
she's 6 months along. And this clear, like, invitation, she's going to understand what you're going through. She's going to be a great companion through this. Like, nobody else is going to listen to you. This is going to be really hard.
Yeah.
But here's this person who is going to not just listen to you, but be really excited for you. And so Mary makes a journey
It's a long journey
out
because
to the countryside
yeah,
where Elizabeth lives.
days of travel as a 14-year-old pregnant woman by herself.
Yeah, like that. I wish there was more detail about that. But
Yeah.
she arrives, Elizabeth greets her, and Elizabeth's baby in her womb leaps with joy at the presence of Mary's baby, who is Jesus.
Yeah.
And that in itself, like, just gives me chills all over. See, I'm gonna cry
Now
in this.
we need tissues in this new studio.
A tissue box.
I don't know.
And so that baby knows that she's carrying. And
Yeah.
what did she need? She needed confirmation.
Yep.
You have this vision in the night of this angel, and she must have been doubting herself,
Yeah.
And Elizabeth says, "How am I so fortunate that you would come to visit me?" The mother of my
Mhm.
Savior. So they just have this instant connection. And I just think of it like, why are you pregnant? Well, how did you get pregnant? Like, these are
right.
both kind of miraculous.
Yeah.
And both announced supernaturally.
That's right.
And so,
And they spend time together supporting.
yeah. And
That's the
like,
companionship piece.
right. And she spends 3 months there, which if you do the math, she arrived when Elizabeth was 6 months pregnant. And so she would have left, I like to think, after the birth because she would be birthing alone
Yeah.
with her dear husband, but in a, husband to be
stable.
in
Yeah.
a stable. And so I like to think that it doesn't tell us for sure in the Bible if she was present, but seems to be.
Yeah.
But that was a gift to have witnessed that and
And been
to have been
mentored.
together. And who else could have been that friend? And that was a direct gift from God. And that's what we hope for. Sometimes when we can't go out and chase a friend down like you do, select somebody, pray for that person
Yeah.
to come along who understands, who's been ahead. Like Elizabeth was farther down the road than Mary
Yep.
and oh yeah, you're going to feel this in a couple months. And oh yeah, that's normal. And, I like to put their swollen feet up together on a, on a stool. I don't know. I just think
rub each
it's
other's
just
feet.
such a special story about so much more than just,
Yeah, that this miraculous but also scary thing is happening, and they can have that together, and they can learn from each other, support each other.
yeah.
Where society and the religious community, it's more stigma, it's more problematic, and
Yeah.
they had each other. And yeah, I think it's really powerful example that we kind of gloss over a little bit, that support for, where do we find it? Well, it can be family, friends, but it does you have to be looking for it. You have to.
And she made the difficult journey to go be with her. I mean,
she did kind of go.
The angel didn't say, and you must travel to go. He just said, hey,
Elizabeth is pregnant.
FYI.
I'm pretty sure that's how the Aramaic gets translated.
Sure, yeah.
Hey, yo.
You might want to
just
a little tidbit for you.
Take a little trip down.
Yeah,
down
so
south.
use that information and make the most of it, and find the person who can walk alongside you.
Yes, and for us, our faith journey is the legendary journey that helps give us these kind of ideas, that markers that are both true for us with our understanding of who Jesus is and the story of his kind of life, death, and resurrection, and the best of relational science. The thing that I get excited about is what we've been talking about: calling, commitment, courage, and companionship have strong positive psychology, family systems theory, evidence-based, that this is helpful for us in terms of human flourishing. And we have the biblical truth that this is helpful for us. It's been present
since the beginning of time.
Human flourishing.
Yeah. So nobody said life would be easy.
Nope.
But we don't have to do it alone.
And take that step, be in your body, take a minute, and however you can, in a playful way, enjoy the ride, even when it's being